Hello and welcome everyone to our very much anticipated session, I should say. We've been doing webinars for the past 4 years now, and webinars, panel discussions and all. And today's was actually one of the most sought after. And yes, there he is. I was very worried. Brijesh sir, thank you so much for joining in. For all the team, and there were some slight technical issues, and I'm so glad that Brijesh sir could also join. He's running an extremely tight schedule and still agreed to come. Thank you again, sir, and welcome for coming. Welcome to this session. All right. So we just started actually. Okay. So this is one of our most anticipated session that I've had in a very long time. And the last one that went down so well was the one on the NPCI digital payments session, which had somebody from PCI. Nitin was there from PCI Council, and there was a chief risk officer from NPCI. And again, there was the CIO from FinoBank who had attended. And today's session, everybody, we have actually so many people just messaged me to say that Naren, you couldn't have got a better panel. Who could have asked for a panel better than Mr. Brijesh Singh and Vaishali, who's one of the most well-known faces on the circuit. And of course, who doesn't know Ritesh? And sometimes I wish I didn't. So he's a very good friend of mine. Okay. So welcome everyone, and I'll just go through a brief about everyone. Of course, everyone knows this and knows the people, and I'll still go through a brief, not a very long session, but just a brief on the people and what this session is all about. Give me a moment. All right. One sec. Again, I guess one sec. There's just this technical things. Yes. Okay. All right. There we are. This is something about the people, about the session that we are having. All right. I was not able to touch base with this panel. All right. Here we are. So getting into the session. This is about me. Of course, I will not spend much time about me. I've got my own company, Vista InfoSec. We have been there for 16 years now, to be precise. I myself CISA, CISSP, and many other things. Okay, so now today's day is about our participants. This is about the key highlights of our session. What constitutes a breach? How to respond to an unexpected data breach, explaining the importance of incident response. And here we'll all hear the incident response from our panelists. And today, for a change, I'll not be speaking much. So, eminent panelists for the online discussion that we have. We know Ritesh Bhatia. He's a very well-known crime investigator. He's there on many TV shows. He's a two-time TEDx speaker, CFE from ACFE. He's solved many corporate cases, and even helps individuals on a personal basis also. Yes, so you can spam him. I'll circulate his number also. So, all right, just kidding. Okay, and who doesn't know Mr. Brijesh Singh? He heads the cyber security department, one of the most required departments, actually, if I can say that, for the Maharashtra state. He's from the elite IPS, and before this, he was with a prior stint as a special IG, Inspector General of Police with the CID. He has implemented CCTNS, Crime and Criminal Tracking and Networking Systems project in Maharashtra, and he has given many path-breaking insights. And as a company, we had worked on the CCTNS for Karnataka and for, I think, Orissa on the data security, but we got a huge amount. We have seen how Mr. Singh had done it for Maharashtra also. And due to his efforts, Maharashtra has implemented very path-breaking efforts and IT schemes for like the online FIRs that you can file, advanced forensics, digitization of the state's crime records. And he is very well known for investigating very key crime issues. And he is one of the persons whom he is the person whom the attendees are very much looking forward to hearing his experience on solving these crimes and what's to be done to prevent such occurrences in the future. And Miss Vaishali Bhagwat, again, extremely well known. Almost everyone knows her, and she's among the first technology lawyers in the country, having prior qualifications and work experience in the field of computer science, cyber defense, information assurance. She's a practicing lawyer with a degree in computer science. And this is something unique that I really loved about Vaishali, that she is not just a lawyer with a lawyer background, she's got a degree in computer science and law from Pune University. And how that really makes a difference is that when you talk about the law, you also know the technology running in the background. And that is, I believe, is extremely important. And that's really something I really love about Vaishali. And she's done a certification cybersecurity information assurance from Cranfield University, UK. More than 20 years experience in civil and cyber law. So she's worked on cyber law in India, overseas, GDPR, HIPAA. There's so many things to learn from her too. And of course, she's got a very, in NCLT, DRT, TDSAT, educating officer, in cyber. And there are many other things also about her that you can see. She's also done a lot of legal. She's a legal advisor and retainer for several MSMEs and corporates in manufacturing, banking, insurance, fintech, media, and on the list goes. And so this is what we are looking forward to hearing. And I really thank you for sharing your valuable time. That's what I can say to your to the ST panelist who's there online. And we'll quickly jump into the session. Let me start off with you, Vaishali. With the question, actually, okay, just to let the people know who are there, who are attending, is that, yeah.
Slight change in my profile. I'm not looking after cyber now. I look after administration. So I'm sorry I couldn't send you my profile in time. So you probably use an old one. So
no, sir, but still, your experience is there, and who can forget your contribution to the state of cyber law in a country and in a state? So that, of course, matters. Of course, we're not just here for your present designation, but I'm sure for your glorious past that we are looking forward to hearing. All right. So let me start off with Vaishali ji. The number one question that you have received is that what is the state and what is the expectations from breach notification, response, and laws and stuff from the Indian perspective. We'll come to the international, and I know that you are doing very well in GDPR also. But with regards to India, what would be your say on that? What can you share?
First, let me thank you for this invitation and an opportunity to speak to all the participants. Thank you very much, Narendra and Vista. Good afternoon, Brijesh. Good afternoon, Ritesh. As usual, it's an absolute pleasure to be on a panel with Brijesh alongside, and the kind of expertise and experience he'll get on the table is unparalleled. So it's a pleasure to be here. The question that you've asked me, the ambit is so huge, but I'm going to curtail it to a sort of a very short answer so that it just is a precursor to the discussion that we will have eventually.
Right.
So when you say breach notification laws, if I have to put that under an umbrella, we would generally call it as sunshine laws. And what does sunshine laws mean? Sunshine laws are those legislations in India or across the world which gives us the right to the citizens of any democratic country to know what is going on relating to either their data or, let's say, critical information infrastructure. And it is a right which is inherent in the constitution of every country. If I can say, it promotes transparency and accountability. And that is the importance of breach notification. So rather than looking at a breach notification law and tearing it apart from a legislative perspective, if you look at a policy perspective, that is what its intention is. Now, who should know about a breach? There are two people who should know about the breach. One, the person who is directly affected. So if my data, which is in third party's custody, is leaked, or something wrong happens with it, or it lands into the hands of a party that it is not supposed to be in, then I should know as a data subject or the person whose data is in control of a third party. Another entity who should know about a data breach is the regulator of that entity. So it could be, in the Indian context, it could be the RBI, it could be the CERT-In, it could be NPCI, it could be SEBI. So the regulator should know about the entity regulated by it and whether there is any breach that has happened. So sometimes this is also called as an intermediary. Not intermediary the way we would define under the IT Act, but an intermediary meaning a regulator who should know about the breach. All the time, it is not necessary that the data subject should know about it, because there could be times that a breach has happened, but it has not really affected the data subject. So it is unnecessary information. Sometimes this information also could be too complex for the data subject to understand. So it is better that the regulator deals with it. So as I said, I'm giving an umbrella perspective. Every law in its own peculiar and a unique way will address this as I said, as a baseline. That why breach notification, who should know, and then a sort of what should be the reporting structure. I think in our discussion that we were having, I also said that breach notification is perhaps a very word used in common parlance, also which is a word used in some specific legislations, not in till date. It has not really been used in any Indian legislation, especially the Information Technology Act. However, there are certain guidelines which have been issued, certain notifications or directions which have been issued by the regulators, and more particularly RBI and, as I said, certain and SEBI, who have stated that the regulated entities should disclose about their breach within a particular period of time, depending on what the notification is, and also the type of breach that needs to be notified.
Yes.
I hope that sort of broadly answers your question.
Right. So in that context, correct me if I got you wrong, got you right. If I summarize it in one line, there are no direct laws in the Indian context with regards to breach notification and investigation. Okay. Did I summarize it well in the one line?
There is not a law which has been enacted by the legislature as yet.
Right.
Like the Information Technology Act will not directly talk of breach notification. However, there is a law which is now currently in existence, which is say a parliamentarian law, which has been given by notifications.
Right. Okay. So in that case, say somebody who's into FMCG or manufacturing and stuff, can they simply get away with daylight murder because an RBI regulation or a SEBI regulation doesn't really apply to them? I'm sorry, this is something of a trick question. I hope I didn't push you on a wrong foot, Vaishali. But I'm just going through the questions, and there are questions still coming in from the people. And this is just for the audience who are there. Feel free to drop in your questions and please be very pointed to whom to ask so I can put it across. I've got like 25 questions already in the pool over here. All right, yeah. So I hope I didn't put you on a back foot. Yeah.
Not at all. So I definitely don't want to say that you can come to India, collect all the data, not really worry about security and like
because you're not into DFSI, so RBI nahi hai, SEBI nahi hai, you can do whatever you want. Would that be acceptable?
Yeah, correct. So if you're not a regulated entity, the sort of entities that I spoke about, if you're a private entity or a private limited company incorporated in India, not really governed by a regulator. So say pharma companies are again governed by regulators. There will be food and consumable companies regulated by Food and Drugs Act. So I'm not saying these are not regulated entities. So they will have their own systems or in which the breach disclosure should be given to their respective regulators.
Right.
But as data subject, as of now in India, you do not have a specific legislation that empowers a data subject to take action over data breach because there are no breach disclosure laws. Now, again, having said that, let me try and dissect it a little further. The moment you say breach, the breach could be of multiple data sets. It could be private data, it could be sensitive personal information, it could be IP, It
Right.
could be confidential information. So I think your question was about from a specific context of personal and sensitive personal information. We are not
Right.
touching the other sensitive information as yet. What happens if it's a IP loss? What if there is a data theft? What if
Exactly.
confidential information goes up? So in the context of personal and sensitive personal information, if as a data subject, I come to know of a data leak, though it is not mandatory disclosure, but if I come to know of a data leak, I have a civil right to claim damages under 43 of IT Act, which
Right.
can go up
Right.
to 5. Again,
Right.
I want to add here, the problem here is it is not rights-based approach, but it is a damages-based approach. So the moment I
Right.
say, a card company has lost my data, I will go to the adjudicating officer under 43A and I say I suffered loss. The problem is I have to quantify the loss by evidence, which is
Right.
almost, it's almost impossible. So there always has been an argument that it has to be a rights-based approach, that only
Right.
because my right has been affected, I should be able to claim compensation, which is there in most of the mature legislations.
Right. Right. Right.
So, summing it up, is there a data, because of there is an absence of data breach notification legislation in India directly, that does not mean companies have no liability against data subjects or the regulators that they have to report to.
Right.
But it is not under one legislation. There are ways and means in which there will be some sort of a control over the data which they have a dominant interest in.
Okay, that's very well said. Brijesh sir, from your perspective, a very practical perspective, where with these shortcomings that can be seen as a shortcomings, how do organizations supposed to be respond when there is a breach?
Continuing from where Vaishali has left, there is a need for laws to address data breaches in this country, especially regarding compulsory reporting. And she also mentioned that there are notifications. So RBI has mandated way back in 2017 that especially for bank related data, breaches must be reported within 2 to 6 hours. And there's a RBI circular can be found on the RBI website. And they give a detailed checklist as to what is to be reported, how it is to be reported, what is to be investigated, so on and so forth. So at least regarding financial data, you have to be very clear that RBI has cast upon banks and financial institutions and wallets and everybody a responsibility to report breaches within a particular time. Secondly, if you study CERT notifications also, though they do not bind upon you, but they ask you to report breaches to them. Thirdly, that today, see, jurisdictions technically have almost no meaning, in the sense that you are dealing with data of your subjects. Similarly, you are dealing somewhere, even if there is one person whom you are dealing with, who is the subject of the European Union, GDPR applies to you, right? And GDPR is very, very stringent. So we have experts here, Vaishali is there, Ritesh is there. They would tell you that GDPR is so stringent that the fines can be up to 4% of your turnover per breach, per instance. And in fact, largest of the corporations have been fined for data breaches under the GDPR. So if you go to US, then US has a series of different acts, right? From California has its own consumer laws which talk about specific kinds of data, to laws regarding protection of data where children are involved, to health data. HIPAA is very big there. And similarly, you depending upon what data subjects, as Vaishali rightly pointed out, depending upon what data subjects and the sensitivity, there can be different breach notification procedures. Because if you're dealing with data only of Indians, okay, is it financial data? It's non-financial data. Is it sensitive and personal information? So you would have to closely look at laws, try and understand what rules, notifications are concerning the data subjects that you are handling, and what can be the implications. So while there is no specific legal provision, there's no specific law made by the parliament, but there is under notifications specific responsibilities ascribed to people, different data fiduciaries who are handling different kind of data. Plus, if you have any subject who is either a resident of the European Union and of the United States, then different kind of liabilities would be ensuing. So a better approach is to basically understand the GDPR framework, which is a fairly matured framework, and do notify, so that once you notify, you are aware of what you have to do in terms of what kind of liabilities would come, and what legal processes that you may face. For example, forensics. So you would quickly have to do a forensic investigation, and there are set procedures for that. There's enough expertise now available in India. I've dealt with some very large banking cases. Naming them would not be appropriate here, but involving millions of dollars. So there we found that a quick audit, a forensic audit, is essential, and there are various standards which apply to these particular sectors, even regarding forensics. They need to be complied with. And when you are doing this, you are actually you're dealing with a lot of things. You're dealing with a bad press. You're dealing with regulator. If it is the subject of a crime, you're dealing with law enforcement. You're dealing with CERT. You're dealing with multiple people. So it's very essential to have a cyber crisis management plan, and as a subset of cyber crisis management plan, you need to have a breach response plan. Like you see that it's going to tumble your share price, it's going to get you bad press, it's going to expose you to liabilities from people whose data has been breached, because a data breach is not a simple thing. Today, a set of data is taken, then it is used for things like credential stuffing. It is used for finding out where all you have accounts, including your bank accounts, wallet accounts, and other places where you have either valuable information or money. So all this information from a data breach can be used to compromise all possible other accounts. And once this account compromise or takeover or account hijack is complete, then the losses can be anything. Somebody can impersonate you, somebody can empty your bank account, somebody can commit a crime on your behalf, so on and so forth. And then the liability would come on the company from where the data breach has started. And you would be really unfortunate if it is a subject of GDPR countries. So data breach today is really a big deal. You need to have a data breach incident management plan. You need to sort of do tabletop exercises, understand who all are to be notified, what is the format of notification. If you have financial data, then how it's RBI going to be addressed, so on and so forth. And also keep ready all these formats, because I think data breaches have almost become an inevitable reality. I don't know of a company where there hasn't been an attempt of data breach or there hasn't been a data breach. So data breaches we have to live with. The size of data breaches is increasing, and the cost of data breaches is increasing. Every company to recover from a data breach is finding it very, very difficult today. That cost in terms of right from notification cost to legal costs to reputation cost to business costs are very, very high. And I think that it is time that we squarely address this problem. Even in ransomware attacks today, they are doing a secondary leveraging. What they are doing is that they are exfiltrating the data first. If you don't pay ransom, they say that we are going to expose your data. This happened in case of some legal firms also, wherein they exfiltrated the data and they had very sensitive data. So Vaishali would know this, that it included clients like the former US president, and this can be very sensitive data. So data breaches today are very, very important, and rightfully we are talking about how to address a data breach. and if at all an incident happens, how to handle it. It's a wonderful effort, and I congratulate you all for that. Naren ji, you're mute, I think.
Narendra, you are mute.
Oh, I'm sorry about this. Okay, thank you, Ritesh sir, for your time and elaborating so well. Ritesh, coming to you next. What is the see? You've investigated so many cases, and we heard so beautifully from Vaishali regarding the state of the law and order and breach notification in this country. Brijesh sir gave such a wonderful insight on what is required from companies, and now it is not too much; it's too less, as from what I understand from him. And so, Ritesh, coming to your side. Let's assume that somebody has been breached. So the topic of our session is breach identification assessment. So what would be the first steps that a company should take, in your opinion, with your experience? And perhaps after that, Vijay sir can also add, with regards to breach identification, what should be the first steps that companies should take? Now, please talk from the perspective even from the international side, because you got many people from banks and all over here. So PCI DSS would be applicable. I've got some people from NBFCs. So even privacy data would be there. So GDPR, HIPAA, and all are there. And I'm so glad that Brijesh spoke about GDPR also. So from that perspective, what is the first step that companies should ideally take?
So firstly, Narendra, thank you so much for this opportunity. And let me tell you, my two mentors are over here, Vaishali ma'am and Brijesh sir. So I always get to learn so much whenever I have to hear them, or even if I'm on a panel with them. There's always so much of learning. So first, let's understand, I think by and large, I mean, as an investigator, what I have seen, you have the security tools, we have everything, but I don't think so we have an incident response team. That is not there. You have more of those, you will have all sorts of people, but I feel, at least in the Indian context, I see the incident response team missing. So before I come to to answer your question, let's understand that even in the incident response, we know that as per NIST there are 4 levels, and some people have come up with 8 stages. Let's look at that. What are these? The first would be like preparation. Do we really need an incident response team? Yes, you need one IR team. It has to be, you don't have to like hire outsiders for it. It has to be our own, somebody from the cybersecurity, one has to be from the corporate communication, one has to be from the HR, because it's very, why from the HR? Because you don't have to tell all your employees that, okay, look, there has been a breach, and hence constituting a team is very important. There even has to be a security guard from the team, the physical security. You really need those particular people also. Then there is yes,
Ritesh, let me just stop. Let me just pause you and ask you one question. That is, see, this is very good for larger corporates, with a few thousand people or 500 crores plus turnover and stuff. But I'm sure that Vaishali madam and Brijesh sir would also agree that there is a huge amount of risk and tremendous amount of data with the SME. Having like 50 crores, 100 crores or less, in 10, 20 crores, small data processing companies. So I would appreciate if you share some experience even from that level. Large corporates, yes, there are tons of money and budgets, but what about the smaller corporations?
Okay, so even from smaller corporates, if you don't even have a team, at least you have this response plan ready as to what are you going to do at that point of time. Because if we come to SMEs, the first thing they do is like, they like really don't take an evidence. They don't screen record, they don't take, the best would be, I'm sure they can, just pick up their mobile phone and do a complete recording of the particular area also. So they are not doing these particular things. Now, to answer your question, when you're saying like even in case of an SME or any large organization also, when there is a particular data breach, the thing is, are you in a position to contain it? The first thing is about your containment. How are you going to contain it? Investigations, the discovery, all those things can be later, but the first thing is about containing that. So for that, is your team ready to do it? Do they have that enough tools? Do they have enough resources? Do we need to, it is a particular situation I have seen where there is so much of, there's a psychological pressure, there's a pressure of a reputation. You are actually like, you're blank. You really don't know also that what you need to do at that point of time. You're really lost. Even if you're the smartest guy over there, you really don't know. And that's the reason I always insist, even if you don't have a team, you need to have a plan in place that if this happens, what are we going to do? And one of the things, fantastic thing that Brijesh sir recommended is the tabletop exercises. Even if you can't do the drills, I would personally suggest to do drills every 6 months. But even if you can't do those kind of drills, at least do those tabletop exercises. That what are you going to do? Communication wise, Vaishali ma'am has already told you that we need to communicate to certain particular people. But over there, we have to see, like for example, Maze ransomware. Maze ransomware is taking your particular data and it is also saying, look, even if you have a backup, you still need to pay me. Otherwise, I am now going to make it public. Now, certain medium industries are there. They are also listed companies. So again, the bad press, again, the communication part of it, these things like really need to be handled at that point of time, looking at the severity of the situation. Like, you know, there is no playbook or a rule book that you need to do this only. We'll have to understand what kind of data. Is it like a sensitive data that has already gone? Is it related to children? Is it related to health? How are we going to do it? And what is going to be the impact of it? Now, Narendra, you're there, your screen is frozen.
Hey, I'm here. Can you see me?
Yeah, okay, but your screen is frozen. Now look at the Air India data breach that happened. You know, in the Air India data, so let's look at the impact of that particular data breach and let's compare it with the data breach of what happened with Domino's. If you look at it, Air India communicated with all of us. Like, I have flown Air India, so I got an email. You must have got an email. We all got that particular email that, look, these were the things that have happened, you know, and we are sorry about it. So we got that particular response. I think we've lost Narendra, right?
I think we've lost him.
Okay, but are the participants there? And then should we continue?
You can continue. You can continue. You can continue. We'll come back.
Okay. So if you see, as far as Air India was concerned, at Air India, we received those particular emails and all apologizing and other kind of things, and what all our data is exposed. But the same thing with Domino's. Domino's has denied the fact. But what is the point of denying the fact when I can actually go put your mobile number and actually I can find out? Just imagine, Narendra, if your wife has to find out that where at what other places you have ordered pizzas. You know, you know what can happen.
This guy is wicked. I'm gonna kill him now.
I'm just trying to tell you. Just imagine tomorrow if a very large jewelry store's data gets breached, and you know, there we find out that okay, Narendra has bought these diamonds but not given to his wife. You can imagine what could your situation be.
Hey Bhagwan.
Okay, so here is Domino's like completely saying no, that we don't. So you know what kind of
Vaishali is not a divorce lawyer.
Yeah.
Vaishali, you're not a divorce lawyer. He's trying to get people divorced. So
but she can, you know. Okay, at the same point of time, even if Air India has happened, now tell me, Narendra, have you flown Air India in from 2011 to 2021? Did you change your card? Did you block your card after
Actually,
the
I
breach?
looked it up, and actually speaking, my cards had expired since then. My latest cards are from 2017-18. So I really didn't bother. Yeah.
But no. So exactly my point. From the breach is from 2011 to till 2021. Okay, and our cards are over there. The 16-digit numbers are there. The expiry date is there. What have we done about it? Nothing. So we as consumers, we as users also don't take breaches like very seriously. Ideally, we should, if we don't want to change our card, if we don't want to block our card, the least we should do is go and disable the international transactions on the card. Every bank is now providing us that feature to disable the international transactions, because on a foreign website, you know, there are many such websites wherein all I need is your 16-digit card number and expiry date. That's it. No PIN, no CVV, no OTP. So what was actually disturbing in the Air India's mail was that they didn't mention about that one point, that kindly, you know, change your card or block that particular thing. But at least an agency, a government airline at least sent us an email, which was heartening. But the same thing, look at the other ones, they haven't done that. And the risk we are seeing, because we have not touched upon the impact of data breaches. Look at the sextortion scams that happened. I had like vice presidents and CEOs of companies, of very large companies, coming to me saying, I got an email, and and that email said that, look, this is your password, and the password was given in the subject line. And he said, look, but this is my password. How did he come to know about it? And the mail says that a malware has been installed on your computer, and now we know everything. You have watched pornography, you have accessed your banking passwords, we have everything. So people had reasons to be scared, for the only reason because the passwords were there. But this was a pure sextortion scam. The passwords came because of credential stuffing. It is because of all these username and passwords were dumped on the dark web, which the hackers then used it to their advantage. Narendra.
Right. Thank you so much, Ritesh. Thank you so much, and I'll keep you posted on the outcome of what you said now. So anyway, all right. So Vaishali, we're coming to you next. This is really interesting. It is going so well, and time is just us look at the watch.
Naren has an
It's
incident response
going
plan.
very fast.
You
Yeah,
need an
Naren has a
incident.
domestic incident response plan.
Yeah. More lagega. I'll go kill him after the call, actually. So that's a different story. Okay, now coming to Vaishali madam. Vaishali madam, see, the problem is many companies, whether it is the Indian IT Act, whether it is GDPR, HIPAA, or whatever be the case, there is a common misconception that we are too small, और हमको ये सब नहीं होता है. And it is only for the Citibanks and the HSBCs and the ICICIs and the big guys. Everybody is targeting them. So what sort of cases have you handled so far, and what would be your advice from the because this is very expensive, when a breach happens, you lose business, you lose time. So what would be your advice to these SME? I'm very concerned about the SME sector, which is like largely unorganized in my opinion, with regards to data security. So Brijesh sir can also enlighten us on that. What has been the incident so far, and what would be your advice to the SMEs, and what to do for them, because they don't have the contacts, to call directly somebody at a level of Brijesh Singh sir to sir mera ye ho gaya, please help me out, or a Ritesh, or even yourself. So what would be your advice to them in case a breach happens, and whether in your experience what is the risk that they are exposed to?
Thanks, Narendra. It's a very valuable question and a very relevant one, especially from the MSc point of view. And we deal with such cases very, very regularly. And over the years, I have learned that earlier, in all my enthusiasm to educate companies that how they should be safe and secure, we did so many training programs with, say, CII and DSCI and MCCI, and I realized that convincing corporates to attend those programs and pay whatever fee, that registration fee, was so difficult. And we were spending so much of our effort trying to educate, telling, come listen to us so that you don't have to come to us later. Where actually we charge you 20 times what we would have charged you now. So I realized that was an absolute stupidity. I should have just kept quiet there, because once the company comes to a lawyer after a breach happens, they are ready to pay you anything that you ask for. But if the same or that amount divided by 50, if you pay and listen to experts telling you how to mitigate a loss, or what your processes should be in place so that an incident like this doesn't happen, or even if it happens, how to get out of it with minimum damage, I think that value first organizations should realize that there is value in it. There is that we completely understand that when you are a small or a medium or even a micro enterprise, there is no such thing as small when you are handling data. Irrespective of the size of your company, the moment you start handling data which has value, now data which has value is personal and sensitive personal information. Data which has value is your own designs, say technical drawings and other intellectual property that you're going to create over a period of time. It can be trade secrets, it could be confidential information, financial information, information that you require to have a competitive edge over the others. All that information you have based on which you're actually going to build your business later. So protecting it right from inception has to be a default setting or a default exercise. And if you have to keep 10 rupees aside for it, that is the best thing you need to do, because then you don't have to spend, as I said, 10 into several other zeros after the breach happens. So first, understanding it that you are dealing with sensitive information, not only third party sensitive information, your own information which has value. So we try to tell companies, first identify that. What is it that you require to protect? Don't go in and protect everything, because it's unnecessary and it's an unnecessary expense also. So first identify, do I really need to protect this, or is it available in the public domain? Then I may as well not protect it, because even if I lose it, I cannot get any relief from any courts. The other party is going to argue that was in the public domain. So why spend time and money on protecting it? So the basic exercise has to be that identify what you have and only then decide what lock to put on it and what should be the value of the lock. Because it depends on the value of the data that you're trying to protect. I think if we have this clarity while doing business, then most of the things will be in order. It's actually how you manage your business and you manage your life. And if you're organized, then even protecting becomes easy. But if you're so disorganized that you don't even know which data is where and in whose hands, then it is impossible to protect it. So from an SME perspective, and coming back to the three things that we always talk about with people, process, and technology in terms of securing. But even before you deploy that, first try and identify, do I even have anything to protect? Then who is asking me to protect it? Is it by contract that I need to? So are you entering into a contract with, say, a company which is going to entrust you data of European nationals? Then you have a choiceless situation. You have to be GDPR compliant. If you're not going to get that business. And GDPR compliance, as we all know, is not just a paper compliance. It is about your posture. It is about how you think privacy. It is about how you think about data protection, and that is how you need to implement it. So it has to become, it has to become part of the personality of your company. It is not something that should be an afterthought. In another context, we always say that I'll just complete this and take.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I think.
No, there was one question I wanted to add to this. Is that so? If some company is there, he has got, or that company has got GDPR data. Since you mentioned GDPR, I'm asking. And there has been a breach. And it's not a very large organization. Maybe it's like, maybe a 20 crore company or something. Maybe so he's at a 200 people working in the company. So in that case, what is the relief that he has that in India, or what should he do next? Because it's GDPR. If he goes to the police station and says GDPR ka data, he'll say, I don't know what is GDPR. It doesn't get relevant. So what should he do next?
So, okay, let's try and understand how these laws work in different jurisdictions. What does GDPR say? Or what did the data regulation even before the GDPR say? That if the data of European nationals have to leave Europe's geographical jurisdiction, then the geography or the jurisdiction that it enters needs to have a security posture which is at par at what Europe has. So obviously India never had that. So at that time they had what they called it as safe harbor guidelines. So if a country was a safe harbor to send the data, only then the European data would have come to that country, so that the Europeans are assured that their data is protected as well as it would have been protected if it was inside Europe. That has been the basic or the backstory of GDPR. Now, after GDPR, it just got enhanced into perhaps a better worded and a more robust legislation. But the principle remains the same, that if the European nationals' data is coming in India, then the Indian counterpart who's going to process the data has to be compliant with a law that gives Europeans the same assurance that Europeans would have if the data remained within their country. Now, if there is a violation, if there is a breach by the Indian counterpart or the data processor, and there is loss of data of European nationals, under GDPR, the litigation doesn't happen in India. The litigation will happen as per contract, where the contracting parties will recover or get themselves indemnified, because who will be sued for under GDPR? The parent European company will be sued in Europe. Now
Right.
the Indian
controllers.
counterpart, so the Indian counterpart or the data processor is going to give a back-to-back indemnity. So if they are fined with 4% of their global revenue, the Indian counterpart will have to pay that, and if not, it goes into liquidation. So at best, what I can envisage, the Indian counterpart will land up in NCLT before the insolvency and bankruptcy proceedings. Not get hauled up for GDPR violation, but because they are unable to pay the fine, they will go for winding up. Now, this is the civil side of it. Now, what is the criminal side of it? Data is lost because there was a breach. So either hacking or insider theft. Then normal IPC and IT Act provisions will apply. The investigating authorities, Indian lawyers, Indian judges need not know what GDPR is. It's irrelevant for them. Because you can't have a criminal prosecution under a GDPR section. It has to be under IPC or IT Act.
Right.
I don't know whether.
Right. No, the jurisdiction is not there of the country. I'm getting what you're saying. Very interesting, actually. Very interesting. So, Brijesh sir, from your side, with regards to all these crimes that is happening, what would be your take on the way that the crimes are spread out across the large enterprises or the smaller enterprises? You know, like 50 to 100 crores, 500 crores. How do you see the breakup? Are these companies at equal risk as the large companies, or more at risk, or less at risk? Can you give one or two examples without taking names, of course? And since you have investigated like hundreds of cases, so just as a thought.
I mean, the irony is that there is no clarity regarding data, in the sense that I think most of the breaches are never reported outside. I know of a recent breach, a very large sector was affected, but nobody outside the industry knows, because it was secretly patched inside and nobody was told. Even the regulators were not told. So most of the breaches are never known. Second thing about what Vaishali pointed out is the danger of the breaches actually being regarding your business secrets or intellectual property. It's not just about personal data. The list of your vendors, the list of your ingredients, your sourcing, your designs and things like that. You see the example of Nortel. Nortel was one of the biggest internet companies which built hardware, routers, everything. And the Chinese secretly hacked it till the time they could come up with Huawei. And you see today Nortel does not exist anywhere, and Huawei is the world leader in 5G technology today. You're on mute actually, so I can't hear you, whatever you're saying. Nalini, you're on mute. Yeah, may I continue?
Hello. Yes, sir. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, you're saying something.
No, sir. I was just saying whether I'm audible. Okay, yeah, go ahead, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So the irony is today that these silent breaches are probably more dangerous. And again, it's not basically whether you're a large enterprise or small enterprise. It depends on the kind of data you're handling. Look at health data breaches. So a particular hospital lost 30 million scans. Imagine this, a very important hospital, 30 million scans went out. And these scans were accessible with the person's mobile number, name, medical history, so on and so forth. See, this kind of information can be then leveraged for something very important. It may be a very important political personage about whose health people may be wanting to know, and they may be wanting to know as to what is happening. Similarly, these nation states basically concentrate on data breaches which actually are never known outside, more like industrial espionage. In technical sectors, like let's say today some company is manufacturing vaccines or testing vaccines or doing some cutting biomedical research. So this would be attacked, and nation states and organized cyber criminal groups, they specialize in these attacks. So today, if you look at the APTs, the advanced persistent threats, the better known ones are the Lazarus or the so-called fancy bears, which either operate from erstwhile Russian countries or North Koreans. These are the better known ones, but they specialize and they are never known, and they are the more serious threat to data, because even if you look at the average time to discover a breach, it is more than some 200 days, 250 days by various estimates, if at all it is discovered. And let me tell you that if you're facing a very sophisticated adversary, or if you're dealing in a critical sector, the adversary may sit on your system for years and you would never know. And the adversary would be silently exfiltrating the data. This is the more dangerous kind of data breach, which we should also be talking about. It is not just about the size of the enterprise. It's the criticality of the data, not just criticality from the point of view of personally identifiable information or health information, but what does, from a business point of view, it can be an existential threat. That, let's say,
Right.
Coca-Cola protects its designs, the particular mix it uses. If it is some hacker, steals it and puts it out, the company would suffer a huge business loss. So similarly, anybody who's dealing with anything which is important to them or to their customers or to regulators have to understand where the crown jewels lie. And Vaishali rightly pointed out and said that it's not that you go and secure out everything. You know what is the most important part of your data, inventorize it, and then you go on to secure it. You rightly asked the question that how does a small enterprise secure its data or handle data breaches, because it's very costly. You see, ironically, today almost everything is IT business. It's not a bank with an IT business. It's an IT business with banking functions, right? So today, almost everybody is primarily on an IT platform, and the risk of an adversary, be it a nation state, be it your business competitor, be it a cyber criminal, is very, very high. I have co-written an article which the title was "Data is an Inflammable Oil." Everybody used to say data is a new oil. I said data is inflammable oil, because
Yeah.
as oil
Yeah,
is
that's well said.
costly, it can also burn you. So understanding that if it is inflammable, then you will have to take precautions. Whether you're a small enterprise, whether you're a big enterprise, whether you're a small petrol pump or you're a small dentist, it doesn't matter. You will have to secure your data, and it's not all that difficult. Basic cyber hygiene can be maintained. Your people can be trained properly, and some level of encryption should be used so that even if there's a breach, then it's difficult to decrypt that data. So basic cyber hygiene, basic common sense, basic practices to ensure cyber security are a must. The size of the enterprise does not matter. Naren?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for elaborating so well. And it's, I've been in this industry for more than 25 years, but still hearing you and Vaishali madam, there's so much still to learn. Ritesh, I really didn't learn anything. It was just time pass for me. So, okay. So, Vaishali madam, coming back to you, is that in case somebody gets breached, this is a nice question somebody just floated out. That is, what kind of question is expected to be handed over to the investigating officer investigating breach incident? And then after that, perhaps, Ritesh, you can also help in what sort of data can be collated and how.
So it's a very important question as to who is asking you for the information. Now, if it is an investigating authority, the law of the land says that there has to be full transparent disclosure to an investigating authority, and there has to be full cooperation. Now, there cannot be any argument for or against it, because that is what the law says. Now, how much can I tell? How much I should not tell? What is it that I can get away with?
That is exactly the point. That is exactly what happens actually.
Yeah. So there is
why are they asking?
The right answer I can give on a public forum is that you have to say everything. You have to disclose everything, because that is what you're expected to do under the law of the land. There has to be, as I said, full transparent disclosure and full cooperation with the investigating authorities. So if the police are investigating the case, you have to give. Now I'll come to a very specific case where the investigating authorities were not from India, and there was a cross-border crime that was getting
that was my next point actually.
So
that was my next question. So thanks for that.
Yeah, so I'm not going to tell my client's name, which is an Indian entity. But when we were asked to disclose certain information, we did take up a stand that we have no obligation under the Constitution of India to cooperate as a matter of duty to an investigating authority outside our jurisdiction, unless the information is asked through proper channels, either diplomatic channels, either through a court order, or through because of MLATs and interrogatory procedures, where these are reciprocal procedures for two countries to collaborate and cooperate. Only then, unless and until there is a court order, a private entity is not under any obligation to disclose data to a foreign investigation authority. Though the crime that was getting investigated had happened on Indian soil, but because the effects could be felt from various parts of the world, that is how several investigation agencies were involved in it. So that is just a small take on how much you can disclose. But in India, on Indian soil, if the Indian police authorities are investigating, the company is duty bound to disclose. Anything that you do not disclose, which you are bound to disclose, will invite another set of criminal prosecution on you. You will be, there could be prosecution of non-cooperation, destruction of evidence, influencing of witnesses, and all of that. And Brijesh is a better person to say about all this.
Right. So, Brijesh sir, any thoughts on this? And as you speak, perhaps if you can touch on one more point, that is, see, sometimes for people who are fortunate enough to have somebody like Vaishali on their side, different story. But then sometimes it is very well possible that is the investigating officer or the person in charge at the police station might not even give the time of day, might not even give any support. So in that case, if I'm really aggrieved, so what are the measures that I can take to ensure that I get at least some hearing? So carrying forward from Vaishali madam.
No, what's your question? Your question is about difficulty in registering FIR or about investigation?
Sir, the first thing is carry forward on a very practical way to the question that I had asked Vaishali madam. That is, what data should be given over to an investigating officer, and is there something that is too much? That is the first point. And Vaishali madam said that everything that you ask in Indian soil has to be provided. And the second, but I asked a follow through on that to you, is that in case I don't know anybody, or I believe the investigating officer is not really doing his job very well, and he just just doing a superficial investigation and moving on, so and really ignoring me. So then what do I do? So these are the two extremes that I can look at.
Vaishali has some point. Let her complete.
So yeah, I think just before Brijesh answers, let me bridge that gap. So Narendra, you had two questions. One is, it seems now to me that you had two questions. One is, if I'm an affected party who is a victim of a breach, And if I have to go and lodge a complaint, what should I do? And second is, if there is a breach and I am under investigation for a breach, I have not gone and lodged the complaint. I'm under investigation for a breach, and the investigating authorities are coming to me to ask for information. What should be my stand? Let me try and answer this so that perhaps Brijesh can take over from there. So if you're a victim of a breach and you need to go and lodge a complaint, yes, going to the nearest police station or the cybercrime cell or the cybercrime police station is the best way in which you can do that. The law now also says that if any police station refuses to register your FIR, you can go to the court and take appropriate orders directing the police station to investigate and furnish a report to court. So you have a recourse of a judicial intervention if investigating authorities are not doing what they're supposed to do. Now, second is, the moment though you go to the police or to the court or the police come to you, the obligation for disclosure is full transparent disclosure. You can't say, I will tell you only this and now you do what you can, but I'm not going to give you the rest under the garb of confidentiality, because sometimes all these breaches can open a different can of worms. It can open, you may be investigated for some other crime because you have reported this, and that is why you may not want to disclose everything. So it doesn't really work that way then. Over to you, Brijesh. I don't know if I added value with this intervention.
No, wonderful. So Naren, this is how investigation works. That once you go to the crime scene, you take over the crime scene, right? And you restrict anybody else's access. So where is the question of choosing what data you want to give or you don't want to give? Like on a physical crime scene, we put a yellow tape. We once we go to a digital crime scene, we would ensure that that we have secure access to the crime scene. See, this is essential because there would be pieces of evidence, forensic evidence everywhere. It may be, in fact, something which is live in progress. It may be exfiltration live in progress. We may be required to image a live system. So where are you going to tell me that, oh, don't touch this, don't access this system or access only this system? Because I will, as an investigator, perform a full forensic audit. Even whatever auditor you basically appoint will have to submit a copy of the report to the investigating authority. Because apart from what you do for a root cause analysis or for cyber insurance or for let's say limiting your liability, if there's a criminal element, that is all independent of this. And see, let me tell you something which probably the people of this country do not generally appreciate, is that in any crime, it is versus the state. There is no individual, right? Any crime that happens is versus the state, and then the state takes over. So there is no role of anybody trying to tell you that, okay, you cannot access this data or you can access this data. The access is complete the moment police enters the scene of crime. So any attempt to do otherwise will be, to put it very plainly, very stupid, one. And second, that it can cause legal liabilities, like you're obstructing the cause of justice. You are probably helping to destroy evidence, conceal evidence. You are helping the perpetrator to run away, so on and so forth. And since you are already in knee deep in whatever, it's not very helpful to not cooperate with police at that time.
Nice.
It's better. It's better to help, because ultimately investigation is the process of finding out truth. If attribution is required, or if it is important to know that what kind of agency would have done this, or what kind of gang would have done this, what kind of person would have done this, what are the tracks, what are the logs, what is the kind of malware, then for this attribution, for the purposes of getting evidence, forensic evidence, which should be useful in the court of law at the time of trial, you would need access. And now coming to the second point, that as let's say an aggrieved individual, if you want to lodge a complaint. So I understand that it's slightly difficult to lodge a complaint because there are various things happening here, in the sense that the number of these complaints is very high. Sometimes it's very unclear whether it's a civil case or it's a criminal case, or whether there is actual loss happened or not. And these laws are in a way new to the police also. You also understand that police deals with some 100 odd other laws simultaneously. So it's also a misnomer that you have to go to a cyber police station. A normal police station has all the powers of a cyber police station. Every police station can deal with a cyber crime case. A cyber police station is like a specialist doctor, that if your case involves things which basically are slightly complicated or have a larger area of jurisdiction involved in it, then you can talk to them. But see, not every case is a cyber case. If somebody puts a mock photo of yours on Facebook, it's not a cyber case. It may be simple defamation or something, right? If somebody has defrauded you, it's not a cyber case, right? Cyber cases, if you look at particular sections of the IT Act, particularly 66 and 67, there are very few crimes which actually can be called cyber crime cases. So it's basically IPC plus generally some other cyber crime. And what the victim is interested in is generally of this investigation, in the sense that, can you take this photo down, right? Can you trace who this person is? Can I get my money back? So these aspects become more important. In fact, the central government has come up with a helpline, which is probably, everybody should note it down, 155260. So this, if somebody has lost money in a cyber fraud, then they can actually go ahead and talk to this number. There's also a portal called cybercrime.gov.in, where you can, it's not an FIR registering portal, but it takes your complaint, then redirects your complaint to the local police station, wherever it is in the country, right from Madurai to Mumbai, wherever it is, it would locate that police station, send it to the concerned police station, generate a ticket, and follow it up. So cybercrime.gov.in, and the number I gave you, which is a complaint portal, which is, that number is a helpline number to prevent the flight of money, because money flies today. It jumps from one wallet to another ATM to third account to fourth merchant, and it's very difficult to trace it in real time. If you call this number, at least it can be stopped. All concerned stakeholders can be informed, and the flight of money can be stopped, and the money can be frozen, and there is a high chance that you would be able to get your money back. So I understand that there are difficulties in investigation, there are difficulties in registration. There are two kinds of difficulties. One is that the serious things are not reported, and there's an over-reporting of frivolous things, which actually at times would consume so much of investigatory resources that would be that one would not have those resources to deal with all the other things that the police station deals with. So let us say that there is somebody has hacked your social media account, your Twitter account, and if I have to send a team for that to Bhubaneswar, now imagine the cost to the government, right? The cost to the government would be huge. So somewhere, ironically, we have to, everybody optimizes, we have to optimize. And though the law does not allow us to pick and choose what to investigate, but based on limitation of resources, you have to prioritize. And this is what happens. But having said this, everywhere the cyber forensics and crime investigation capabilities and capacity both are being increased. Maharashtra was one of the first states to take it up. We set up one cyber police station and a cyber crime cell in every district, even in the remotest corners. So we could create successfully almost 51 labs, which way back in 2017 were state of the art, which were as good as anybody else anywhere in the world. So, and these cells have dealt with thousands and thousands and literally thousands of cases, wherein they have been successful in investigation, detection, bringing the perpetrator to the boot. But there are significant difficulties here, that wherever the data is held by somebody outside our jurisdiction, See, our same companies, they respect GDPR, and they would bend over backwards and do somersaults to say that we are GDPR compliant. But if you come up with an Indian law which is as simple as saying that appoint a grievance officer, then there would be so much of a hue and cry, and people would start shouting, from the roofs that, oh, this is happening, and government surveillance has increased, and we do not want to comply. So it's like that. Uh, your laws are laws, and our laws are Tommy, right? So,
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point, sir.
so somewhere we should know that wherever laws are coming up, it's a good development, and we should see that laws are complied to fully. And I think wherever there are gaps, then both the central government and the state governments are ensuring that capability and capacity both are being developed to address any gaps in cybercrime investigation and registration. Naren?
You're on mute, Narendra. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you for the heads up. Yeah, time just zoomed by actually. Time just really zoomed by. Thank you so much, Vijay sir, for such a enlightening insight in the way things work. And every time I hear Vaishali madam, I learn something new. Today's keyword for me was sunshine loss. So that got me thinking. So sunshine loss is the word for the day, guys. All right. So again, I have to regrettably end it. I'm sorry, it's just way over time, and everybody's still hanging on to hear from you. But I really appreciate Vaishali madam, Brijesh sir, and of course my dear friend Ritesh for being there. And you have come, spent so much of your time prepared for this, more than 1 hour of your time, so much valuable time. And if I do that multiplication of one session by 100 times, I can do the maths on the cost of this one session for Vaishali madams, but she's come and she's spoken. Thank you so much for being there. I really appreciate you being there, and thank you so much. And for all the attendees, guys, thank you for being there. And do submit your questions, whatever there might be. And I promise you, I'll put it across to Brijesh sir, Vaishali madam, and of course Ritesh, and try and get it answered out. So thank you again, madam. Thank you, team, for being there. Have a wonderful day and week ahead. Stay safe. Take care. Thank you, sir. Thank you.